Hi everyone, welcome back to Mental Melodies. This is your host Carmen Bradley. We are starting off the month of December. I haven't seen you guys in about a week and I feel like I haven't been here in a while. So my mind's been pretty quiet, which is different for me. I went to go hang out with my family for a little over 5 days and then gave me just like a good nice break from everything. But then I woke up today and I was like, what am I going to talk about today? What am I going to sing about today? All of that. I've been practicing an Olivia Rodrigo song, so I went with that. It's a little bit angry, so I was thinking that I could talk about anger. I'm not like particularly angry with somebody right now, maybe a couple of people. But I didn't like pick this because I wanted to sing an angry song and like throw out a message at anybody. I just am like working on my singing voice and there's some range in here that I want to work on, and also some new things on the guitar. So thank you as always just for like listening and watching and allowing me to grow as a person and an artist in front of you. It's definitely a very vulnerable thing, and I think after taking like a week off, perhaps it was just a little bit of like my doubt maybe kind of creeps in, and it's, I don't know, I start to wonder again, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And there's something that I thought about, that I've been thinking about for a while, just in regards to having like big dreams or wanting to work towards something. And when I was in the teaching career and there was just so much time that I wasn't in charge of, I really had to kind of think about like, how can I take control of my life and my hours and my days and my habits. And this is all stuff that I've talked about before. But I think that it's important to get to a place where you're doing more of what you want to do and less of what you have to do. And the funny, like, ironic thing about when you're doing stuff that you want to do is that it can turn into something that you have to do. And that's why it's been hard to kind of like find a balance lately, because all the things that I'm doing are things that I want to do. But when you become like so overwhelmed and so busy, it can start to feel like I have to play the guitar today, or I have to practice my singing, etc. And I don't ever want it to feel that way. And most of the time it doesn't feel that way. So that's really good. But it definitely took some time. And a lot of it is like a mindset shift, especially when you're first starting out at something. And I've talked about this like area of discomfort before. Mel Robbins does a really good podcast about this. I don't know if she wrote a book. She's out there talking about a lot of things. But there was one specific episode of, either it was her podcast or she was a guest, but look her up, Mel Robbins. And she was talking about just like counting to 5 and jumping into things. So you're sitting there and you're not, like, you're procrastinating, or you are thinking about other things, or you're doing literally anything but the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And you can just count to 5 and then get started on 5. And it sounds kind of silly, but little mind tricks like that definitely do help just to get the ball rolling. And I guess that was something that I was thinking about this morning, was just like getting the ball rolling again. I definitely needed a break, but sometimes when I take a break, I think like either depression sits in, or just like the comfort of laziness sits in, and I just start feeling kind of, again, like I have to do things rather than I want to do things. So that was a little side spiel. I was going to talk about anger as an emotion, and this is one of those things I think I'm still figuring out. My guest 2 or so weeks ago, Nate and I had talked about anger quite a bit. We brought it up a little bit when he was on the episode, but not as extensively like as we could have. And anger is such an interesting thing. And for me personally, I've never really felt comfortable being angry or feeling angry. And I believe that I suppressed a lot of anger as a kid. And I was the kind of person, like in high school, in junior high, where I was just, I guess, genuinely happy, or able, not even, I guess sometimes I put on a happy face, but for the most part I think I was just a happy kid. And I think that my general disposition is happy. And I've been learning about that, and I've talked about that on this show, how like people genuinely do have like to the core dispositions of who they are, you know, and it's so hard to figure that out. And that's something I've talked about too. Like, how do I figure out who I was before the world got to me? But I keep going back to certain times in my life, which I've talked about this too, like going back to when I was in high school, when I felt very much like myself, whatever that means. And people can attest to that. Like, you hear people say, I don't feel like myself right now, or I'm feeling more like myself, and whatever that means for them. And I think, like, for me, when I started to feel more like myself and to connect with like my teenage self, it was me being more happy, being more joyful, being more social. I've talked about how, like, getting over, that's not the phrase I want to use, but I use it all the time, getting over social anxiety. I guess I'll say I healed from it or something. But I strongly identified with my social anxiety to the point where I leaned into my introverted side so very much, and like forgot that I had an extroverted side. And now if people know me now, like, I think I had a friend who was like, you're not an introvert, which isn't true. I'm very much half and half, which is, I guess, the Gemini in me. And I was watching Taylor Tomlinson. She's a comedian that I have studied, I guess. I really connect with her. And she was saying, like, there's no way to be both. You can't be an introvert and an extrovert, because she's an introvert. But I genuinely think that you can. And I think everybody is different. And I think that you can be one thing in one stage of your life and one thing in another, depending on what you need. So it's funny because as I'm talking about this, I kept telling you I'm going to talk about anger, and I haven't. And I think it's because it's such maybe an uncomfortable thing for me. Like, I have never really figured out how to feel angry in a healthy way. And anger has come out in unhealthy ways, usually within romantic relationships. And I think this happens a lot with people where they get into a romantic relationship and then things are triggered that are not usually out in the limelight. Like, you don't show a certain side to your friends or to your family or at work or whatever. And in a romantic relationship, a lot of things get really highlighted. So I've been very, 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 very angry at times. There was a period in my 20s where I was drinking a lot and I would always get angry. And I was blacking out, so I don't remember a lot of it, and that was pretty embarrassing. But after like analyzing that and starting to heal from that, I realized that a lot of my anger from things that had happened in my childhood was simply suppressed. So I was going back to what I was saying about like being the kind of person that I was in high school. My senior year of high school, I was actually in foster care, and it was this really weird like year of my life where I wasn't like living with my siblings, and I was living with friends kind of, and they became like my official foster parents, and it was this whole thing. And I had social workers like pulling me out of class, and they were always really amazed because I had straight A's in high school, and that didn't change in senior year when things were really tough. And that's when depression like first started setting in for me. But again, they were just like amazed that I kept things going. Like, my response to my life situation was not what people would expect of a teenager. But I think it's, again, just goes back to the fact that like everybody's different and everybody responds to things differently. And that's something that I always think about when I go back to hang out with my siblings, because that's been something that I've been thinking about for some time. And when I was really considering like going into a PhD program, one of the questions that I wanted to study was, why do siblings turn out so differently even though they live in the same situation? And so I was always confused, like, why is my sister turning out this way and I'm turning out that way, and my brother was this way and my sister was that way. So I'm going to end this little segment with the cover that I promised, and then we will talk more about all of that when we get back from the break. So this is Vampire by Olivia Rodrigo, and here we go. I'm going to turn it up a little bit, yeah. That's better. Hate to give the satisfaction asking how you're doing now. How's the castle built off people you pretend to care about? It's what you wanted. Look at you, cool guy, you got it. I see the parties and the diamonds sometimes when I close my eyes. Built on a paradise. I've made some real big mistakes, but you make the worst one look fine. I should have known it was strange. You only come out at night. I used to think I was smart. You made me look so naive. The way you sold me for parts. You sunk your teeth into me. Oh, blood sucker, fame fucker, bleeding me dry like a goddamn vampire. And every girl I ever talked to told me you were bad news. You called them crazy. God, I hate the way I called them crazy too. You're so convincing. How do you lie without flinching? Oh, what a mesmerizing, paralyzing, fucked up little thrill. Can't figure out just how you're doing, and God knows you never will. Good for me and not her. 'Cause girls your age know better. I've made some real big mistakes. You make the worst one look fine. I should have known it was strange. You only come out at night. I used to think I was smart. You made me look so naive. The way you sold me for parts. You sunk your teeth into me. Sucker, fame fucker, bleeding me dry like a goddamn vampire. You said it was true love, but how could that be hard? You can't love anyone, 'cause that would mean you had a heart. I try to help you out, but now I know I can't, 'cause how you think's the kind of thing I'll never understand. I've made some real big mistakes. You make the worst one look fine. I should have known it was strange. You only come out at night. I used to think I was smart. You made me look so naive. The way you sold me for parts. You sunk your teeth into me. Oh, blood sucker, fame fucker, bleeding me dry like a goddamn vampire. See you in a couple minutes.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
Now on digital and DVD. Space Wars Quest for the Deep Star is an epic sci-fi adventure.
Do what needs to be done.
An edge-of-your-seat wild ride.
We have company.
Tons of popcorn-munching fun. 5 stars. A love letter to the sci-fi films of the 70s and 80s. With plenty of action and fun for all. You need to see it. You really do.
The captain just decided it's time to go.
I am ready for a sequel. Experience a bold new adventure. Space Wars: Quest for the Deep Star.
A good old-fashioned adventure.
Now on digital and DVD. Now on digital and DVD.
Hit it.
Space Wars: Quest for the Deep Star is an epic sci-fi adventure.
Do what needs to be done.
An edge-of-your-seat wild ride.
We have company.
Tons of popcorn-munching fun. 5.
Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of Mental Melodies. I am your host, Carmen Bradley. You can hear kind of the raspiness in my voice. I was very hesitant to cover that song, and I've talked about how this show has been a very healing experience for me, and it's really given me it gives me a space to come every week and make sure that I am practicing and covering the songs I want to cover and singing and performing live. And I've been learning so many lessons about, if I mess up, being able to push through it and learning how to be a professional at the things that I'm doing. And so once again, as I say every week, just thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me through all of this. I've gotten just so much support, so much love, so much positivity, and even gratitude from people. And I just think a lot about what this show means to me and why I'm doing it. And essentially I do feel that it's part of my way of giving back. But on the flip side, it's also for me very much selfishly. There was something that I've been working on my voice a lot, obviously, and I talked about this once where I had to go through a healing journey to kind of find my voice again. And part of that, there was something I noticed right before I started Mental Melodies, was that I noticed that in conversations with other people, I will be the person to sit back and listen, and I'll listen to you for hours, even if I don't want to, even if I'm exhausted and you are unaware that I no longer have the energy to take on what you're throwing at me, I will still do it, especially when I can tell that somebody needs to be listened to in that moment. And that comes from being a teacher and a therapist, and also just from being who I am. I think that's who I am as a person. I have always been kind, and I have always been very aware of what other people need, and I will fill needs. And so before this show, I was saying, I was noticing that I will cut myself off. I'll start telling a story to a friend at work, and I will completely cut myself off, and I won't finish the story, and then they'll start talking, and then it'll become about them. And so part of what this show is for me is just an outlet for me to be able to talk without having to stop, because nobody can interrupt me, and this is a whole hour of having to listen to me. Obviously, I bring on guests too, and then I get to do the other thing where I sit and I listen and I give them space and I can facilitate healing, and that is really cool. But for me personally, like I said, this is it's a space for me where I've been thinking things through and realizing things and sharing things, and I hope that despite it being inherently selfish most of the time, that it is also a good thing for people. So anyway, thank you for listening to my TED Talk today. I'm going to go back to what I was talking about so I can kind of have some continuity. And so I was talking about how it's really interesting to me that my sisters and I all kind of turned out differently. And something that I thought about was, whether or not I am or have been bipolar since I was a kid, kind of thing. Because the way that I responded to seeing what I was talking about earlier, where I wasn't in control of my time, right? My profession is eating up all of my time. Here's these things that I want to do. How am I going to do that? And I went on this whole soul-searching journey to figure out basically how to take my time back and how to become the kind of person that I wanted to become. And I've talked about this before, where one specific thing that I've been working on for a long time is follow-through and consistency. So I'm the kind of person who does what I say I'm going to do. If I'm going to sign up for a marathon, I'm going to do it. And even if I didn't train the exact way that I needed to, when I signed up, I went and I did it. I blew my knee out at mile 16, but I signed up for the marathon and I went and I did it. The marathon was an interesting thing for me as I'm talking about this journey, because I don't know if I've mentioned this. I think I have briefly, but I felt like that was rather than being like in direct preparation for a running career or something, it was just in direct preparation for specifically like this stage in my life, because I did learn how to finish things. So I did a 20-mile run in my training with a good friend of mine at the time who helped me out with that, because he was actually a runner and I was just pretending to be. But what I did is I set out and I would run at 4 in the morning, or I would run at night, and I would run 10 miles. One time I ran 12 miles with my little dog in a stroller, and he got motion sickness, and it was the whole thing. But I learned a lot about myself at that time, and that's when I started to really like pull things up from the surface and really analyze like who I was and learn about how my childhood affected me. And that was a really beautiful time in my life, I guess. That was like right after I moved here. But I brought that up because I guess especially after bringing Joshua Dagan onto the show and then Nate onto the show, and then having all of these like shifts, emotional shifts like in front of all of you, I've really been thinking about just, I don't know, how people are different. Like I think of my sister, for example. Her name's Camille. She's 1 year older than me, and she has been basically doing the same thing like day after day, week after week for years, and it's always blown my mind. Like the other night I was feeling kind of stressed, I guess, and I was just eating chocolate, like mindlessly eating chocolate, and I thought about my sister in that moment, because I don't know that she has ever done that, and I would deign to say that she's never done that. I've always known her to be somebody to be able to like take a bite of a cupcake and be done, and I had to learn how to do that. I was like a binge eater. I've talked about eating disorders that I've had here on this show, and I feel like I've talked about it in length to the point where you all understand, but I'm sure many of you don't really, especially if you've never been through it. But I mean, in college, I remember this one specific time I ordered like Domino's, and I ordered like a large pizza, 12 or 16 wings, cheese sticks, and cinnamon sticks, and I ate all of that. And then I went and got like a pint, not a pint, because that's a little one. I'm talking like the ice cream that you buy for like your whole family. I went and got one of those too and ate that whole thing. And then I ate a whole loaf of bread and a whole container of Nutella, and that was all in one night. That's like insane. If you were listening to what I just said, like I ate all of that in one sitting. That was insane. And that was during the time where I started like using laxatives, and I was working out like 4 to 5 hours a day. Now again, like compared to my sister, she's been going to the gym probably 5 to 6 days a week, every week, for like her whole life. And it's so interesting to me how, again, just like two different people can grow up in the same environment, have the same exact genetics, and be an entirely different person. However, to go back to my point, like, gosh, this is episode 10 or so like 7 episodes ago. That's crazy how like time flies. But I was talking about how like I genuinely believe that things like ADHD can be healed. And while I'm obviously now more convinced that there is a difference in my chemistry, right? Like talking to experts, and my uncle's an expert, about things like this, it is very obvious that I have a different chemical makeup than like my sisters do, or than some other people do, or maybe like even the majority of the world does. However, I don't think that means that I necessarily have to surrender to it, and that's where I've been finding this balance lately, and this is something that I've talked about. I'm gonna have to find a new catchphrase for that. But I do think it's important, as I talk through these things week after week, if you're listening week after week, for me to be able to point out the different topics so that you can follow it if that's what you're doing, or if you're using these to help better your life. Why did I go on that rant? Oh yeah, so because I've talked about limitations and accepting them versus like rising above them, and I think it's always just a balancing act in life, right? Like we go back and forth, and I think it can be discouraging when you're going through this journey and you realize that despite the fact you're working toward like consistency, you can't always be that way. So like a couple weeks ago, I was not bragging, but I was mentioning that I was trying to get my mornings back and that I was succeeding in that, and I was starting to feel a little more balanced, and that was all well and good. And then last week I had a commercial Thursday night till 6 in the morning, and then I was singing on Friday, so I was up till 4:30 in the morning, and then one thing led to another, and I couldn't get to sleep Sunday night, and so now I'm back. Crazy lady's back. I'm not supposed to call myself crazy, but I'm just kidding. But I've been up all night for the past few nights, and it's just that's something that I've been thinking about, was just how like I respond to things so interestingly, and this is like a half-baked thought right now. Israel, I know you're not watching, but I'll tell you about this later. Anyway, I'm thinking about how I respond very strongly to situations in my life because I'm like a problem solver, and so something comes up and I want to fix it, and I want to like do it the right way, and I come up with all of these different guidelines. I'm being a little vague because I have so many ideas popping up in my mind right now. I was telling Maria and you all that my mind was blank. It's not anymore. We've got it going. We're revving up. So many things to talk about now. But yeah, so there's this one lesson I've been learning, and I've talked about duality, which is why I'm always, you notice like I'm always holding my hands up when I talk about duality, because I feel like I'm holding the two things in my mind. So there's this balance I was trying to create between rigidity and fluidity. And I'm going to leave you with that, and I'll talk about that after the break. See you in a couple minutes.
Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Skoda with Social Media Shows. Well, I thank all of you for your support through these last several years, and it's been a lot of fun. We've given people a voice they never had before. Now, Social Media Shows is always collaborating with our veterans to help them do things and help out the veterans who are struggling today. And we teamed up with GI Connections, connecting veterans with resources. So please consider helping and donating to this great cause, because we're always doing things for veterans. So GI Connections, Social Media Shows, and you is what makes the world a better place. Once again, Joseph Skoda, proud United States Air Force veteran. Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Skoda with Social Media Shows. Well, I thank all of you for your support through these last several years, and it's been a lot of fun. We've given people a voice they never had before. Now, Social Media Shows is...
Hi, I'm Deacon T with Modern Word Ministries. It's great to be with you today. Just a short little promo for our show. Every Sunday morning we have service, and you can follow us at 10 a.m. Pacific Time on modernwordministries.org. And if you missed us or you want to see some of our older messages, go ahead and check us out on socialmediashows.com every single morning at 9 a.m. It's a great way to kick off your day, get a little bit of the word in you, get something uplifting, get you started off on your way. If you're looking for prayer or you need some help, reach out to us. If you go to our website, again, that's modernwordministries.org, you can interact with me via telephone, via DM, text message, whatever you want. I'll get right back to you. So if you need prayer, you need help, you just need somebody to talk to, Modern Word Ministries is here for you. We are your church in the community. So until you see you next time, be blessed, everybody. Bye-bye. Hi, I'm Deacon T with Modern Word Ministries.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the third segment now of this episode of Mental Melodies. I'm your host, Carmen Bradley. Once again, thank you for listening, for continuing to listen. Thank you for sharing and liking and all of that stuff, for supporting me as a person and an artist. I guess you can let me know if this ever gets old, but I'll probably never stop being grateful. I was talking about rigidity and fluidity, and I was saying that because if you go back to that time in college that I mentioned where I was going through that eating disorder thing, I think I did talk about this before. structure is something that I've learned that I thrive on, and yet at the same time I need a lot of freedom. So again, back to those opposites. I genuinely don't know, like, if this is because I'm a Gemini and I have two sides of me, or if plenty of people can relate or nobody can relate. But when I got to college, it obviously, you all have been to high school in America, right? So you know what it's like. And you have all of this time and it's planned out for you and you don't even get to really think about it. So while teachers are telling you to get planners and organize your time, you can only organize your time like to the extent that you have a free moment to think about what homework you have to do. At least that's how it was for me, because like I said, I was a straight A student back then, and I was always working, and I was in various different sports and clubs and choir and going to church and singing in the church band and doing all these things. I was so busy in high school, and I hardly ever slept. And so when I got to college and there was not a lot of structure, that was when I started to realize I had to create my own structure, and that was pretty overwhelming for me. But I just kind of buckled up and figured it out, as I always did. But I was definitely creating some bad habits because I was so used to essentially working all of the time. And my friendships just coming from the various clubs and stuff that I did in high school, that when I got to college, that's when I started to turn into the socially anxious person that I've mentioned that I've been. And I was isolating myself a lot. I was planning out my days to where I had like 5 hours of exercise happening in a day, or more or less, but that was like the average. And then I would go to class. I always like went to office hours, so I was seeing my professors and stuff. And then when it came to friendships, that was something that started to fall by the wayside. First couple of years I was pretty good at it, but the last year was like of college was like the first year I got a very serious relationship. And then I isolated a lot. And interestingly enough, I kept saying I was going to talk about anger, and I haven't really been, but that was the relationship that kind of brought that out of me. And that was a really interesting thing. But I'm talking about this idea of like rigidity versus fluidity. And so I continued, I guess, to be this way, where I would plan out my days like on the hour. And then I got into teaching high school, and again I had a lot less freedom to plan that out, and in a way I guess maybe that helped me because I had a lot less time than I did in college. And so I kind of just like essentially floated through my 20s not being in a lot of control. And then when I came here to Vegas, and this is the story that I've kind of been telling in bits and pieces, if you're following, I began again to analyze like what it was that I needed in my life in order to be, I keep using this phrase, be who I wanted to be. And I didn't really know like what that meant back then, other than like I just knew I needed to be healthier. Maybe that was what it was. And so I was just like responding to that need. And so interestingly, I guess I'm at a space now where I do have a lot more time on my hands, and I do have a lot less structure. And had it not been for the past 5 years of really thinking about those things, I would be floundering right now because I wouldn't know how to organize my time or how to adjust to change. And I think that's where the rigidity comes in for me, whether it's being on the spectrum or having ADHD. I don't know what it is, but I do have a very strong response to change. And so there are things that I remember in my childhood, I think I shared this story about, I was like age 9 or 10 when I started insisting that my mom not do my laundry because there was a certain way that I had to do it. And I was 9 or 10. And when I used to like think about that, I always saw myself as being a lot older as a kid. I don't know what other people's perceptions are of their childhood. And I think part of it had to do with being an older sibling, but there were just so many things that I did very independently, very, very young. Like I remember not having to be reminded to do homework in kindergarten. I'm pretty sure that's not normal. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know kids. I have a few nieces and nephews, and I had a stepson for a second, and that was not how he was. So I don't know how many people were like me, but I, for some reason, at a very, very early age, was just very, very independent. And I was given something and I would do it. And I guess I inherently felt the importance or whatever. And some of it, I think, has to do with this thing I've been thinking about lately about just like authority, and how I was creatively stunted throughout my school age years because I was very like, I'll do what the teacher says. Like, I didn't want to talk in class. I resented like my friends who got me in trouble because they were talking in class. I didn't share answers with anybody. I usually got like the highest scores on every test, and I never shared it. There were people who did that, like sold their answers or whatever. I know somebody who got through high school like making money that way. And that just never occurred to me. Like, I don't know if I have built-in integrity or snobbishness or something, but it never occurred to me. But on the flip side of that, I didn't think for myself enough. And I mentioned this, that I think that came from the kind of stepfather that I had, because he was so overbearing and so over-controlling that I then responded in that way. So then, again, go back to what I've been talking about my siblings. Like, my siblings weren't really like that. And so why was I like that? Is that just, like, who I am? I think so. But then, at the same time, with opposites, because everything has two sides of one coin, I feel like I've always been a rebel. And that doesn't really make sense to what I'm talking about in high school. But then at the same time it does, because I think about in my own life, I very much was. Like, I was the only one who spoke out against my stepfather. There was a period of time, maybe before junior year, I think, so that's 11th grade, where he was out of the house because he had hurt my brother or something. I can't remember exactly which story it was. And so social workers were involved then too. This was before the foster care story. And we went to court one day, and the family mission was like, get dad back in the house. And my personal mission was keep this monster out of the house. But I wasn't going to court that day like with that mission. My mission, I guess, actually was never that. It was always tell the truth. That was my thing. I did want my mom to leave. I did want my siblings to be safe. I did want to be able to feel like I could relax at home, which I couldn't when he was home. But when it came to things like that, and when it came to like my senior year, when I was going through court cases for my own stuff that happened with him, I remember talking to lawyers and just being like, I genuinely don't, and I'll tell you if it's changed, but I didn't then feel like vengeful. And I think, again, that's partially part of who I am. Because I was mentioning at the beginning of the episode, I don't feel comfortable being angry. I don't like being angry. I don't like having to snap at people. And I've had to recently, because I am the way that I am, and that does get taken advantage of. And so I've had to learn to be different. I've had to learn to let like my angry side come out. And so, I think about, oh gosh, again, my mind is like racing in a million different places right now. So what am I talking about? I guess I'll just roll with it. I think I'm stopping myself because I'm starting to feel it. I really don't like feeling angry. And I guess the weird thing is that like I feel like lately I've almost had to make it known that I'm intelligent or something, that like men know it, men can see it in me, people can see it in me, and yet they still try, whatever it is. There's so many different examples I could give you. I'm sure you're following me anyway. So like if you are friends with me on Facebook, you've seen that I like went off the other day, and that's not like me. And for a while I was too scared to do that. Like when you're working in corporate America, you feel like you can't like speak up for yourself. And I take that to the extreme. Like when I'm thinking about this rigidity thing that I'm talking about, I've always been very extreme. I guess because my mind works that way. Again, is it because I'm a Gemini or what? But I just always see two sides of the same coin. I've always been like that. I'm having like a memory of when I was sitting up. We had this like pretty interesting loft in our house. We lived in a really big house. We had one of those weird life stories where it was like from the outside looking in, we just looked like the perfect like white family with a dad and a mom and 5 kids. But if you really knew what was going on in the house, it wasn't that great. Sidebar. But I was up talking to one of these like social workers, and I remember them saying that to me, like, you're very articulate and you're very aware and you know these things. And as a teenager, I don't know, that was just like true, and it was who I was. And then anyway, again, with me channeling that energy, I feel like I am that person again. And with being that person comes like almost like the responsibility to speak out. And that has been a little bit frustrating for me lately. But then at the same time, I think that the more I do it, the easier I will get. So it will get. So watch out, world. Because I notice, like, I've been watching grown-ups be grown-ups and me pretending to be a grown-up for a long time. Like, you know, people cussing and watching porn and doing things that grown-ups do, and me just being like, whoa, like, those things are not okay. I don't know, like, just being not a prude, but I don't know, like, it took me a while to really grow up to be a grown-up. Not in, like, when I was, I don't know, 20 or whatever, I was very much independent. Like I mentioned, I've always been independent. I was like, I'm gonna do what I gotta do. I did the math, I paid my bills, I did all of those things. But I don't know, like, growing up and seeing myself as like a woman has been a process, and I'm like almost still in it. And so it's in how, like, being able to give space to those parts of me that I didn't give space to. That's how I'm growing up. So the angry part of me is the part that I have to give space to. And I'm still not really figuring that out, because I have a lot of theories about anger as well. And I worked with clients on anger, and I genuinely think that while anger can be positive in the sense that it teaches you about your boundaries. There's a lot of great like quotes out there about this. Like if you're feeling angry, it's because like a boundary was crossed, and that's very much true. But anger is also like fire, and I believe there's too much anger in the world, and perhaps that's why I respond the way I do to it, because I think there's not enough kindness. I think there's not enough goodness. I think there's not enough patience in the world. I think there's too much irritation, and I think that people just let their anger fly. And I am not like that. I am calculated, like, with my anger, and I'll say something if I feel it needs to be said, not just because I feel it and they go off the cuff. But there is a balance that needs to be found. If I'm suppressing my anger, that's not healthy anyway, or either, and that's something that goes along with those like emotions sitting in your body that I've talked about before. So I'm gonna end here, and I will continue with that after the break. See you in a couple minutes.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
Now on digital and DVD.
Hit it.
Space Wars Quest for the Deep Star is an epic sci-fi adventure.
Do what needs to be done.
An edge-of-your-seat wild ride.
We have company.
Tons of popcorn-munching fun. 5 stars. A love letter to the sci-fi films of the 70s and 80s. With plenty of action and fun for all. You need to see it. You really do.
The captain just decided it's time to go.
I am ready for a sequel. Experience a bold new adventure. Space Wars: Quest for the Deep Star.
A good old-fashioned adventure.
Now on digital and DVD. Now on digital and DVD.
Hit it.
Space Wars: Quest for the Deep Star is an epic sci-fi adventure.
Do what needs to be done.
An edge-of-your-seat wild ride.
We have company.
Tons of popcorn-munching fun. 5 stars. A love letter to the sci-fi films of the 70s and 80s.
Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the last segment of our episode here today of Mental Melodies with your host, Carmen Bradley. Thank you for watching and listening. I was talking about anger, and the last thing I left off on was about like emotions that bubble up in your body, which goes back to the episode when I had my very first guest, JC, and we were talking about the negative things in life and being able to give space for them. So this episode now, like ending out talking about anger and like giving space for anger, because again, I like I said, there I have theories about it, and I do believe that there's too much of it in the world, and I think again that it comes down to balance. But if you have anger, like about childhood trauma, I guess, for example, if I bring it back to like mental health expertise, if you have anger that's literally sitting in your body, that can be like the source of disease. And so the thing that happens though when you start to pull up stuff from your childhood and you're feeling very angry about stuff in your childhood is that affects your daily life too. And so I think that's why a lot of people, I know that's why a lot of people don't face their childhood traumas at all. And they end up just literally having physical diseases that I do believe can be reversed and changed, because it's easier to take medication the rest of your life for a disease and continue to go with fully westernized medicine and approach to what's going on in your body and emotions. That is easier, while it's hard, than taking the approach where you examine why you might be responsible for what's happening to you. And I say you, going back to something I've mentioned before about having your own, being responsible for your own choices and your own healing. There's, again, that balance. You are responsible once you are aware of how your trauma has treated you or has created who you are. That's your choice then at that point, once you're aware, to change it. And I know I say that in a very strong, like almost pedantic kind of way, and that might throw people off. I'm not saying that it's as easy as, oh, I'm aware of it now and then I can change it in 5 minutes. That's not true. It's a whole process, and it's a decision that you have to make, where for one thing, I'm deciding to be aware of it. I'm deciding to go talk to a therapist about what happened to me in childhood, or open up about it with a friend, or write about it in a journal, or just even think about it on your own time. That's what I used to do when I would run, is I would run through all of these things that had happened. I mentioned that in the beginning when I first started running, it was because I was literally running. Like I was in fight, flight, or freeze. I was in flight. So my sympathetic nervous system, my parasympathetic nervous system. Anyway, I was literally in flight, and I was literally running. Like I would run down the stairs and I would run out of my apartment and I would just run. And like there were a couple times my sister and my boyfriend at the time would like have to come find me because I didn't tell them why I was running, because it was just happening and I was having like flashbacks. And I've talked about this kind of shift where I moved to Vegas and all of a sudden I'm feeling much more in control. Like I feel like I'm choosing to run right now. And while there are things going on in my brain that I'm working through, I'm at least choosing to take one step in front of the other, and I'm choosing to witness those things rather than to be a victim to them. So it's almost like taking the stuff in the back of my head that's been fighting me for years and pulling it in the front and literally witnessing it and saying to myself, like, gosh, that was really, really hard. And then feeling the emotions you need to feel. There again, my brain is just like racing today. But going back to that anger then, and how like I guess I had to face it, there were a lot of things in my childhood that I had a right to be angry about. But when you are just living life and you're surviving, and then for me, like I mentioned my last year of high school, I was in foster care. For me, that period of time in my life, I was not in control. And that's the thing about being a kid, is you're very much not in control. So you can't do too much, I think, when you're growing up in situations like that. There's not even a lot of therapy that you can go through at that time if the people in your life that are causing your distress are like the ones that are supposed to be protecting you. There's not a lot you can do until after. And then when I was in college, I just wasn't really ready to face it. So again, I've talked about how mental illness is a way for us to cope with that. So I coped with it the way that I could, and that turned into eating disorders and over-exercising and over-studying, and then eventually like isolating myself. So all of the social anxiety and all of that I was going through after college, I believe was a result of me not dealing with my emotions of what had just happened. And this is why I have grandiose ideas about changing mental health in schools and changing mental health in college. Sometimes I feel very disillusioned or discouraged by these plans that I have, because I wonder if teenagers need mental health support because their parents are the ones making it that way, then could any of the things that I want to do change that? Because ultimately I think it would come down to parents need to change. And so I've had this idea that, like, at first I was like, man, I really got to get in and I got to help kids. I got to help teenagers. I got to help them learn about mental health and stuff. And that's all valid and true. But when I became a therapist, I realized that the sweet spot is in people who are figuring out what relationships to be in, and who haven't like had kids yet, and who are in control, can be in control of their lives. It's people who are already grown up that need to take the responsibility to change things and to not be who their parents were, if that's the case, you know? And anyway, again, I feel like I keep just like avoiding this anger topic. I don't know if that's true. But yeah, I guess I just have a lot of half-baked ideas about these things, but I think everybody's following me. Obviously, you're following me week after week for whatever reason, so that's a good thing. But yeah, I'm trying to think of what like my takeaway is like about this emotion. I was talking about how like I was working with some clients on it, and I was struggling with it in my own life. But at the time I was struggling with it, again, it was in the context of a relationship. And I remember there was one point where what was happening to me was my anger was coming out and it was taking over the driver's seat. So if you think about like that movie Split, where you have personalities that take over, that was literally what was happening. I would get triggered and this angry part would take over. It's not split personality in my case, even though there's a part of me that wants to have every mental illness. There's something to that, which I'll talk about later. But it's not. It could be borderline personality. I'm throwing out things that don't really matter. I'm conceptualizing them, I guess. I've just studied these things, so my mind just goes to things. But in borderline personality disorder, there's what happens is you do have that angry part that gets triggered because you had some kind of an attachment or abandonment wound when you were a kid. That's where it stems from, which again is why I say like mental illness can be cured. There's different stuff, you know, ADHD that's in your brain or bipolarity that's in your brain. Despite that, I've also said I believe you still can reverse those things, because there's things I've reversed in myself that I could have just surrendered to and said, this is who I am because this is the chemical makeup of my brain or whatever. And that's just not, I guess that's partially who I am. I could never just like surrender in that way. And I'm thinking about a lot of the stuff that I've talked about today, like about my childhood and specifically my adolescence, is like the reason why I was in foster care, aside from the black eye that my stepfather gave me, was because I made a choice, kind of. again, you don't have a lot of power as a kid. You just don't. You don't have a lot of autonomy. You have to find that autonomy as a grown-up. It was a choice that my mom had made, but it was also, I was at a spot where I could say to her, like, dude, sorry, no more. If you're making this choice, then I'm gonna go, and I did. So anyway, I started this episode off saying, like, I've always kind of been a happy person. There was a lot of stuff going on in my adolescence, which you now know of some of it, that I had reason to give up on school, to be angry, to turn toward drugs or something. I didn't, and I think partially I just got lucky because I was so sheltered, and again, I was responding in the way I mentioned, where I was just like following rules and doing all the things, and I was very driven and ambitious. I mentioned, like, I didn't have to have help with homework in like kindergarten, and so again, I think that's just partially who I am, because I think it's evident to everyone watching me now that that's what I'm doing with my music and acting, is that I said I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to find a way to be better every single day at what I do. And nobody's seen me give up yet, and everybody's seen me get better. My voice has gotten stronger, my guitar skills are getting better, all of those things are happening. And so I guess naturally turned to things like school and sports when I was a kid, I guess as a way to cope. And but there are things that I guess I don't know if I'm angry about them now, but there are things that were, again, in my body that I like needed to talk about. And I guess I feel like a little compelled to share this now, because my whole social media show's journey started on Vegas Views, and we were talking about my brother, and my brother died because he was involved in gangs, and it was a very violent death, and it sent me into spirals that I never thought I would be sent into. And that's an interesting fact, I guess, I've been thinking about, because this is something I've been healing from in the last year. Again, I don't know, there's always like the moment something happens and you kind of take time to heal from it, and then there's the time when it pops up again later and you have to heal from it again. My brother's been popping up a lot this year for a lot of different reasons. But there was something we were talking about on Vegas Views and on Danny's podcast, and one of the things Danny kept saying was, gosh, I feel so sorry for his dad. This is my brother's dad, my stepdad. And I wasn't brave enough to shut Danny down at that moment, but I wanted to, because I had mentioned a couple times the reason I know my brother was into violence was because my stepfather was a violent person. Is it sad that he lost his son? Yes. Is it more sad that he sent my brother into a violent lifestyle and caused all of these different things in my family because of the person that he was? Yes. I again mentioned, like, vengeance was never my thing, but I have noticed that things come full circle, and that part of my duty or whatever here as now like a public figure talking to people about things is that I now have the power to speak up about things that I couldn't back then. I am getting a lot braver. I'm getting a lot stronger. I am finding that sweet spot with, like, yes, Carmen is very nice. I am very nice. I am very generous. I know all this about myself. But I'm also very intelligent and very astute. And I see things that happen. And the more support that I get, the more that I will start saying things about what is happening. Not because I am an angry person who lets my anger take control, but because I can take my anger and I can feel it and I can see it as a lesson, and I can choose to say something when something needs to be said. So I ended on a very serious note today, but I think as part of my growth, I needed to end that way, because I've been talking a lot about how you're going to see me grow. And that's something that I've needed to grow from this, like, too kind of thing. In order to become, again, the person I want to be, whatever that means today. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Please continue to do those things. If you have any feedback, you know how to get a hold of me. If you want to sponsor, please email Maria, admin@socialmediashows.com. I've got a website in the works. It's going to be carmenbradley.com, so probably by next week there'll be something up to see. Again, if you want to come on the show, please email me directly, carmenbradley@gmail.com. We can get together and chat about that, and I will see you in a week.